hello, everybody. I'm delighted to welcome you to this Synity CFO to CFO podcast. My name's David Axson. I've been working in the finance space for almost 40 years now, working with CFOs around the world, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Bill Teuber, who's a senior principal of Bridge Growth Partners, and he's also a director of both Exedian and Synity. And I'm delighted that Bill's joining us today because prior to his current role, he spent almost 20 years in senior leadership positions at EMC, including both Chief Financial Officer and the Global Head of Sales. And prior to that, he was a partner with Coopers & Lybrand. So we share a little bit of heritage because I used to work for Deloitte Haskins & Sells in the UK, which ended up merging with Coopers & Lybrand, becoming Coopers & Lybrand Deloitte in the late 1980s. So a little bit of shared heritage there. I'm delighted that Bill's joining us today to bring his wealth of experience as a senior finance executive to bear. So Bill, welcome.
Thank you, David. And I'm going to one-up you. I've been in the finance world for 45 years.
You got the edge on me, which is why you're in Miami and I'm in Ohio.
But yeah, it's been a long road. Two distinct careers, public accounting for half my career, and in my mid-40s, I went to one of my clients. I did something you can't do today.
Yes.
Because of Sarbanes-Oxley, and I went to work for one of my clients, and I loved every minute of it. 21 years at EMC until we sold it to Dell.
And you were right in the middle of the data space and the explosion that's taken off over the last quarter of a century or so. So maybe we can start there. Data has always been foundational to the CFO. How have you seen the role of the CFO evolve with respect to data during your career?
Well, clearly what's transformed over the years is the access to more data. And when I think about the 14-column spreadsheets and the exquisite calculations you had to go through to do a formula or whatever back in the old days, in today's world, you have with the artificial intelligence and so much compute behind you, you have the ability to source so many more factors to understand what your KPIs are and how to come to the building blocks of the decision you have to make. At the end of the day, you still have to make decisions as CFO and as business managers. But in today's world, you have way more data behind you to help you make those decisions, to help the business run more smoothly, operate more efficiently. And it's really fundamental to everything that I would say more than just CFOs do. It's fundamental to running any business.
Yeah, I'd agree with you completely. And one of the things I've seen when I started, probably like you, we basically only really had a small set of financial data to use, what's sat in the general ledger and the sub-ledger. Over the years, it's really expanded. We've not just got financial data, we've got a whole host of operating metrics we can begin to look at. And increasingly today, we've got a really rich set of external data around markets and customers that can really inform our ability as finance professionals to explain those numbers. And I think that's a fascinating experience.
And you think about timeliness, David. Back in the day, it was, you had to close, you were batch processing, you had to close the books at the end of the month. Now we have the ability, and I would say not so much in the, the financial records, but in real time to understand what's happening in the business because of the interaction between the daters and the users, between the IoT, the Internet of Things, the sensors, and whether it's a monitoring system or whether it's a financial system. But you have real-time data to inform you what happened, today, not just what happened, 30 days ago. And it's having, a little bit tighter steering wheel that really allows you to understand what to do next and really allows you to understand what do you think is going to happen next. So, looking backwards as well as looking forward is greatly enhanced by having the data of what's happening in real time.
Yeah, we don't have to wait to close the books to access that information and inform those decisions.
And you and I have been around long enough to know that that was an excruciating process, right? It wouldn't be because but again, what goes into the set of books is a series of accounts, a series of actions, and it's those actions that really influence how the financials come out, and that's where you want to be. You want to be ahead of that game.
Very much so. Very much so. One of the things that I think is really unique about your experience is, you started off very heavy in finance. You were CFO of EMC, And then you took what is perhaps a little interesting journey to then become the global head of sales. How did a career in finance translate into then leading a global sales force?
Well, I'm going to back you up a little bit, and just a little bit above. I was an English major undergrad, right? And I was an English major because I knew I was good at analytics and math. But I wanted the U.S. basketball analogy. I wanted to learn how to dribble with my left hand. Okay, and so I spent 4 years being liberally educated, knowing it would come in handy someday. Now, I graduated in '73 in the midst of a crisis. The oil was $100 a barrel. Inflation was 18%, and it was impossible to get a job. And I actually got a job at what was then Burroughs Corporation, but is now part of Unisys, as a sales rep. And I was terrible at it. Really bad at it. So I had a chance, opportunity to go back to graduate school full time after about a year, got an MBA, and then went into. I knew I was going to be good at accounting, and I went into Cooper's and Lyburn as a staff accountant, rose quickly. Actually left and started my own business, and so I had to actually sell the projects I was doing. I had to do it, and then collect the money to actually make a living. And so you get used to being able to be customer friendly. Even though you're doing accounting, you have to be able to customer friendly. 6 years later, Cooper's came and bought it, made me a partner, stayed there 7 years. But then I went to EMC and was CFO for a good part of 10 years. What happened is I became vice chairman, and the guy who was running sales quit. Now, one of the things that CFOs do, you're there at the end of every quarter, right? You are making sure that all the deals, A, they conform, and B, they get recorded. And you're there till midnight. You're there, making sure that everything that should happen does happen. And so I obviously got very friendly with the sales force. And at the same time, because I was CFO and a lot of our big clients were the big banks, I got to be friendly with, the banks wanted to call on me too. So I just had these relationships with our biggest accounts, so that, after becoming vice chairman and after 10 years as CFO, when it was time to hand the reins to somebody else, the guy who ran sales quit. So I never said I want to be CFO next. I was actually in the middle of putting together the syndicate to take VMware public. And when the head of sales quits, Joe Tucci, our CEO, came to me and goes, "I want you to do that." And I never really thought about it, but I said, I went home. I said to my wife, "This could be fun. It may not be good for us," because I've traveled extensively, and but it was it worked out for everybody. Worked out for me, worked out for the company, worked out for my wife.
Yeah, I'm increasingly seeing that people that have a strong finance background really apply themselves to many different elements of the business. I never thought when I moved to the US about 30 years ago that, I'd be helping with a startup that went public in 6 years from its founding. And doing all of that sort of stuff. But having that basic finance and accounting acumen really allows you to try and understand how a business fits together. Because ultimately, every action in a business is going to impact a line item on the P&L account or the balance sheet. And that, to me, is what's really been exciting about my finance career, is to understand why the numbers look the way they do and how they get created. What actions are we taking? What decisions are we making? That, to me, is fascinating.
And I never stopped thinking like a CFO, though, either. And that's part of the experience I was able to bring to the sales function. Now, when I was made head of sales, it wasn't the most popular move in the industry. There were some people who said, "I forgot more about sales than you'll ever know." Right. I said, "Give me a chance." And, having that perspective was really important. And let's go back to tie it back to data. So one of the first things I did was, McKinsey was already working for us. I said, let's find out where we sell. And because we had a great deal of market share, but we didn't really have the crisp data around what were our best markets and where was the white space. And so we did this, tremendously detailed analysis that came back and said, in this pyramid of opportunity, you only sell in these spaces, and there's a lot of white space. Now, when I present that to the sales leadership, they all laugh and said the data's wrong. Because that's the first reaction to people who are used to working empirically, right? The data can't be wrong. I can't be wrong. The data has to be wrong. So of course we went back and we, fine-tuned the data. It wasn't wrong, but we fine-tuned it and we brought it back. And we said, guys, we are missing so much of the market. Let's go here. And we initiated a huge turn in our go-to-market to attack those segments of the market that we weren't actually selling them, that we had no market share or we had no products for. And so that's a tangible example of having the data and how it influenced strategy. That's so important.
It's also a great example of how finance acumen paired with sales acumen in this case can actually be, 1 + 1 = 3. The whole is greater than the sum of the parts through that collaboration and bringing different skill sets to bear. One of the interesting things I think, and I've been really interested in your perspective, having spent so long in finance and then had senior executive roles in sales and what have you. What advice would you give to CFOs today? We're living in some fairly interesting times. We've got a lot more data. We've got some really cool new technology, but we've also got a market environment we're operating in that seems to be characterized by unpredictability and volatility of almost unprecedented levels. So, if you were stepping into a CFO's shoes today, what would you be thinking?
How do I help the company grow? Because that's what people buy. All right. Everybody wants to, value higher a company that's growing double digits, higher than double digits, depending on the segment of the market you're at. But how to grow? So what does that mean to a CFO? It's not no, it's how. So when people come to you with ideas or whatever, I was not a no guy. I was like, let's figure this out. And let's figure out how to do this if it makes sense. And then secondly, cash is king. Cash has never been anything but king. And if you don't have cash, you're going to have your back against the wall at some point. So it's those two things. How do I grow and how do I make sure I have the cash? And those two sometimes, very frequently, are at odds with each other, right? Because I can invest more to grow faster, but I don't have I either don't have the cash or I got bank cover. And that's where management comes in, right? That's where skill comes in.
Yeah. Well,
I keep preaching that. If it was easy, anybody could do it. But that's where experience, that's where understanding the data, understanding where the growth paths are, understanding what it's going to cost to capture those growth paths. It's so important. But you got to have the cash. If you don't have the cash, your back is against the wall. You're in a weak position.
I often say one of the CFO's primary roles is to create the financial capacity to invest in growth, and cash is foundational for that. One of the things I found most interesting is how CFOs and companies generally have behaved over the last year. There was some research in the Wall Street Journal the other week that cash balances on balance sheets have gone up significantly over the last 12 months. And I think that's really a testament to the speed with which finance and business executives reacted to the sudden downturn that we experienced. A lot of companies suspended share buyback programs, reduced dividend if necessary, and really focused on conserving cash to help them manage through the downturn. Now, obviously, we've had unprecedented, government stimulus in many parts of the world that has aided that. But I think that focus on cash conservation is going to equip many companies to really accelerate their growth if we begin to see a degree of normalcy return to the marketplace. I think that's one of the most interesting things about being a finance professional. I'd just like to end, I like to think about finance. I always say it's the hardest job in business. Maybe I need my head examining. I can look at financial statements and understand why they look the way they do. And perhaps more importantly, how you influence those statements in the future. It's really a fascinating role to play. So what excites you most about the future of finance executive?
I think, the role of the CFO has really changed, right? I mean, I was a nuts and bolts finance. I knew the FASBs. I could write the freaking FASBs, some of them. Probably shouldn't have said that. But anyway, in today's world, you're seeing backgrounds much more like investment bankers, people who don't have that tried and true come up through the ranks of the finance department. And I think that's a good thing as long as you have the strong detail and people underneath you. And again, one of the greatest attributes of a CFO is building a team that can do all the financial reporting, do the tax, do the treasury, do the FP&A. So without that, you can't do the kinds of things that the CFO should do. You can't be the advisor to the CEO, and that's the goal of every CFO, right? Is to be in the room, in the meetings, when important things are discussed, give the alternatives, and be a voice that's listened to. And if you're just, got the green eye shade on and doing the debits and credits, you've missed the boat, and you probably won't have your job for that long.
I agree. And I think it's fascinating to me that as technology and data have exploded and the options have increased significantly, talent is actually becoming more and more important. It's not less important. Some people thought that technology would obsolete the need for some of these roles. Well, the roles are changing, but rich finance talent that can translate the performance of a business into actions that business leaders can then take is really the essence of the role in the future. You mentioned growth and cash conservation as being the two major roles of a CFO. Job one is still ensuring the integrity of the financial statements. It doesn't mean the CFO has to know everything about the nuts and bolts, but they have to have trust in people who do know nuts and bolts. And that's about building the right team and being an effective leader, I think.
Well, in a public company, your signature's on for financials.
Yeah.
You and the C-suite and the CEOs depending on you. So the details better be right. The people better be quality. And when I get to ask questions about that, I never settle. I never settled on. I had an open position and I couldn't find the right person. I'd figure it out before I hired the wrong person. I'd have people doing double duty, and the people I waited for, the people who came in and we built the EMC finance function on, are still either part of my lives in other companies, are still there. It's like when you find a thoroughbred, you stick with them forever, or him or her, and so part of my advice is when you're building a team, don't settle. Get the right person, because it's way more than 10x the wrong person.
That's great advice and wisdom. I just want to thank Bill Teuber again for joining us on this CFO to CFO podcast, sponsored by Cinity. The wealth of experience you bring to the table and very practical advice. Sort of been there, done that, got the t-shirt, or maybe it's the golf shirt, I'm not sure. It's been an absolute pleasure to speak with you today. And thank you all for your time, and welcome to the next CFO and CFO podcast from Cinity.